Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Public Safety and Admin Subcommittee. For the record, I'm Chair and Delegate Jazz Lewis. Today we have a full docket. We only have 3 agencies, but they're pretty hardy, and we're looking forward to getting into it. I just want to say at the outset, I know there's some complications, but we weren't able to get the agency testimony for GoCap and corrections with enough time for us to post that, and that's really important for the public because they hound us as legislators. I've heard that this may be a DBM issue, but I just had to state for the record that we got it late, and we really encourage you guys to get it to us as soon as possible so that the public has access to that, because everything that we do here is ultimately for the benefit of the public, okay? With that, of course, we have, I think it's still correct to say GoCap. We keep changing the name. Governor's Office of Crime Control Prevention with its new leader, Dorothy Lenig. Thank you. We're going to have you today. Of course, Secretary Scruggs with Corrections and her team, and John Guthrum, the Executive Secretary and team for Board of Public Works. We're going to begin with the Board of Public Works today, and then work from there. So we're going to start with Micah Richards of DLS for the analysis. You can begin when you are ready.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the chair and the citizens of the great state of Maryland for allowing me to speak before you today. My name is Micah Richards, and I will present the Board of Public Works budget analysis. Starting on page 1, the governor, the comptroller, and the state treasurer comprise the Board of Public Works. The board approves leases and contracts executed by state agencies. The fiscal 25 allowance decreases by $15.9 million compared to the fiscal 24 working appropriation to $30.5 million. On page 2, the fiscal 24 legislative priority is section 19 of the fiscal 24 budget bill, included a total of $13 million to provide grants to multiple private nonprofits. In Exhibit 1, 10 grantees have received a portion of the funding, 3 have received all funding in full, and the West Baltimore County Redevelopment Authority payment has not been approved by the Board of Public Works. On page 3, on February 9th, 2024, the Maryland Association of Boards of Education submitted their report on the progress of implementing the pilot programs in at least 2 counties, establishing direct primary care health centers for school system employees and their families. On page 4 in Exhibit 2, 93% of the budget supports grants, payments to erroneously confined individuals, and the contingent fund. Chesapeake Bay Trust has the largest portion of the grant funding at 38%. On page 5 in Exhibit 3, the fiscal 25 allowance decreases by 34.3% compared to fiscal 24. The largest decrease is the Section 19 grant funding to nonprofits of $12.9 million. On page 6, the Justice Thurgood Marshall Amenity Center, located at PS 103 as of December 31st, 2023, completed the restoration project. The center will open July 2024. The one position that was vacant in the Board of Public Works has been currently filled in 2024. On page 8 in Exhibit 4, the Maryland Zoo attendance decreased by 1.2% from fiscal 22 to 23. Weather and the stormwater parking lot reconstruction project affected the attendance. The zoo's goal is to implement a 10-year master plan with multiple additions to the zoo. On page 9, Exhibit 5 shows that the general public attendance decreased by 11.9% and member attendance decreased by 5.6% from fiscal 22 to 23. School field trips increased by 56.8% from fiscal 22 to 23. On page 10, Exhibit 6 shows support has a total of $13.5 million, an increase of 29.5% from fiscal 22 to 23. Revenues has a total of $9.2 million, an increase of 1% from fiscal 22 to 23. From fiscal 22 to 23, program services expenditures increased by 5%, management decreased by 5%, and fundraising increased by 7%. On page 11, Exhibit 7 shows that the majority of the government contributions come from the Board of Public Works, distributing over $5.6 million. On page 13, since the first award for erroneous conviction compensation, the Board of Public Works has approved compensation to 26 individuals, totaling $39 million in awards. In Exhibit 8, spending is expected to remain flat in fiscal 25, but will peak at $9.5 million in fiscal 2026. The out-year cards are projected with no known award amounts beyond fiscal 2027. On page 14, DLS recommends that the Maryland Zoological Society Incorporated submit audited financial statements for fiscal 2024 and quarterly reports showing monthly attendance figures for the zoo for fiscal 2025 by visitor group. This should include a breakdown of the kinds of passes allocated. On page 15, the 2023 Joint Chairman's Report requested for the zoo to submit audited financial statements for fiscal 2023 and monthly attendance figures for fiscal 2024 by visitor group. The reports required to date have been submitted, with additional quarterly reports due later in the fiscal year. That concludes my presentation, and I am available for any questions.
Thank you, Micah. Colleagues, do we have any questions for DLS? Seeing none, we really appreciate your thorough overview. With that, Board of Public Works can begin when you are ready.
Thank you and good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. John Gontram, representing the Board of Public Works. I too would like to thank Mr. Richards for such a thorough analysis. The board's operating budget for FY25 can once again this year be conceptually separated into two categories. The first is pass-through funds, which, as Mr. Richards indicated, is comprised of grants to named operating budget grantees in the board's budget, and we have representatives from those organizations here today to talk about those organizations' activities. The board's contingent fund and payments to erroneously incarcerated individuals. That comprises over 90% of the board's FY25 proposed operating budget. The remaining portion of the board's budget are the funds for the board's operations. These are mainly personnel costs. The board has many specific statutory responsibilities, including administration of the state's tidal wetlands licensing program and payments and advising the board and state agencies on state procurement law. There are two overarching goals for the board staff, which are to facilitate the actions of the board and to make those actions accessible to the general public, the General Assembly, and to the press. I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time, Mr. Chair.
Colleagues, do you have any questions for John? Seeing none, thank you. We do have some testimony. So you are relieved, sir. And I'm going to call them up. I guess there's 4 seats there, so I'll call them up in 4s if it's appropriate. First, Raymond Morris, City of Cumberland. Karen Brown, Historic Annapolis. Robert Flanagan of Western Maryland Scenic Railroad Development Corporation. And Wesley Heinz of Western Maryland Scenic Railroad also. Others will get to you after this panel.
Chairman Lewis, members of the committee, thank you for this.
Sorry, by the way, 2 minutes each
oh,
person.
Don't worry, you won't even have to turn the timer on, I promise you. Chairman Lewis, thank you, and the members of the committee for allowing us to come in today and speak to you. I want to thank the Board of Public Works for all that they have done for the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad in the past, and we look forward to an ongoing relationship. They picked me to go first since the Scenic Railroad starts in Cumberland, and maybe I didn't say this, I'm the mayor of Cumberland also. So we wanted to come down and have this opportunity to speak with you all. And, The Western Maryland Scenic Railroad is a vital part of tourism for the city of Cumberland, for Allegheny County, and also for the city of Frostburg. And we really would like to tell you how wonderful it has been going. We've been doing very well in the last few years. Wes will give you the numbers here in a minute. You know, we're in the middle of a revitalization project in downtown Cumberland. Basically, the city is a construction site, but what that's bringing about is a lot of small businesses that have been created in the last year. And what this really means is the Scenic Railroad is going to be bringing customers to many of these small businesses in the future. You know, this year we did we do the Polar Express. And I would urge you all to come out, bring your families. It is without question a stellar family event. We have other dinner trains and Moonlight Madness and things like that, but for a family event, you can't do much better. Governor Moore and his family came out this year, and we would invite you all to come out and join us in Cumberland, Western Maryland, and see what the dollars do to help us. So that's all I got. Thank you very much.
Well, we will definitely take you up on that. Having young kids, a number of us here, that would be a good time.
And seriously, we would love to have you come out.
Sure. Bob Flanagan, I'm the mayor of Frostburg. So the train runs between Cumberland and Frostburg. It's been doing that for over 35 years, and as Mayor Ray just said, it benefits him, and it certainly benefits Frostburg. We are on the Great Allegheny Passage, which is one of the nicest rail trails in America, and of course runs through our fine state. So not only do we both benefit from the trail, but we also benefit from the train drawing people in. Frostburg and Cumberland have always been railroad towns, so this just helps us solidify the two of us. Over the last 2 years, I've opened up 7 new businesses in my downtown. I'm born and raised, 59 years. I've lived in Frostburg. I'm very proud of that. I've been mayor now. If all goes well, I'll be starting my 8th term come June. So I'm very proud of what we've done. I'm the chair of the railroad. He's the vice chair. And of course, down at the end of the aisle here is Wes, who is our CEO and has been doing amazing work. So please come out and visit with us, and we really appreciate all you do to help us. Thank you. All right, Wes.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman Lewis and committee. Thank you for having us. I just wanted to kind of indicate to you guys what these dollars go towards helping. It's great that we're able to provide a tourism base and this hospitality impact. You know, we run the train and people come to ride it. I've been part of the Western Maryland since middle of 2021, and we've grown from 47,000 riders that year to almost 75,000 in 2023. One of the things that we're able to do at the Western Maryland is we're able to provide for the local school children to ride the train. So we've also seen an increase in the individuals that we can bring on the train and try to have the education piece working. But even more importantly is during the Polar Express, as Mayor Morris mentioned, we have all these children riding the train. So there's 35,000 children riding the train. Who entertains those children? Partly it's people like myself. I'll throw in a chef hat and a Santa Claus hat and do what needs to be done. But more importantly is our middle school, high school, and college-age children are the majority of our actors, if you will. And we're able to provide them a scholarship for participation in the Polar Express. And this year we just sent out the checks to those families for $25,000 plus. So we're actually able to give back to the community in ways that maybe are not so apparent because it looks like we're just running a train. But we have all these other pieces that make us a vital part of the community, Cumberland, Frostburg, and in Allegheny County. And we just want to take this time to say thank you. Definitely come out and ride our train. Governor Moore had a fantastic time. He did wear pajamas, so we do require that you wear pajamas and an ugly Christmas sweater, and we'll take you to see Santa Claus.
You don't have to wear the pajamas, okay? Yeah. If you want to, I believe it is the one time when it is socially acceptable to be wearing your pajamas outside of your own yard, but you do not have to at all. I told the governor that if he did, I would. Fortunately, his staff never told me he was going to be wearing them. I'm sorry.
Both mayors, thank you guys for making the drive out here. I know it was a bit. We really appreciate your presence. And I think we'll probably hold our pajamas, but we look forward to continue to support you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, and now we're going to Karen.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Lewis, and for the rest of the committee for having me here today. My name is Karen Timer Brown, and I'm the President and CEO of Historic Annapolis. We are very proud of our long-standing public-private partnership that exists between the state of Maryland and Historic Annapolis for over 5 decades. We are honored to serve the state as your partner in the care and public presentation of a dozen historic assets in the historic district. It's approximately 40,000 square feet of buildings and about 2 acres of green space in the historic district. And we also are especially proud to welcome over 200,000 visitors to these state assets annually. It's properties such as the William Paca House and garden that we're able to open up to the public. I am in support of and very grateful for the funding recommended for Historic Annapolis. It is critical for us so that we can preserve and protect these physical spaces, as well as share them with the public and connect people to Maryland's diverse heritage. They are economically viable heritage tourism assets. They're a great opportunity for educational programs for school children from all over the state. And they also serve as a way to build community and partnerships so that all feel welcome and included in our sites. We have identified the fact that our true need is in excess of the current state funding. We are faced with aging infrastructure with these older properties, with escalating cost of inflation and operating costs. And additionally, our portfolio has expanded considerably in the past decade with the introduction of the James Bryce House and most recently the John Shaw House. Additional operational funding will be necessary to enable the management and operation of these buildings for which Historic Annapolis is responsible. We're exceptionally excited about the next chapter in the history of the John Shaw House. Once the Department of Legislative Services vacates that building, we are engaging in conversations about future reinvestment of this important historic asset with a long-term tenant. And I also wanted to close by mentioning that we leverage the state funding almost dollar for dollar with private philanthropy that we invest in the care and maintenance of these historic assets. We are very committed to this partnership with the state. Again, I'm grateful for your support and welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank
Colleagues, do you all have questions? Well, we appreciate the work that Historic... Oh, you do? Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take a minute as former president of the Maryland Municipal League to say that it was great to see my distinguished municipal friends from Cumberland and Frostburg here, as well as representatives from the city of Annapolis. And for those of you who came from Western Maryland, we often say in local government that's the level of government where the rubber hits the road. I guess in your case, it's where the rail hits the road. But I just want to thank you for your service and your advocacy, and it's great to see you all today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Isn't that so? They say. Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
All righty. So for the next group of folks, Jana Davis, Chesapeake Bay Trust, Kirby Fowler of Maryland Zoo in Baltimore, Lisa Jones as well. Oh, there she is. And technically a John up here twice. So we'll go to Frank Boston as the fourth person. You can come on up, Frank, and sit at the end there. Thank you, my friend. You can begin.
Mr. Chair, I have someone who's testifying with me. Wait.
All right, we'll wait for this panel and we'll bring them up. Jana, you can begin. Good to see you.
Great. Good to see you too, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Jana Davis, president of the Chesapeake Bay Trust. You may remember we haven't, this is only our second year coming in front of the Appropriations Committee, but you may remember us. You all created us in the 80s, but not with an appropriation, a general appropriation, instead with the Bay Plate and a tax checkoff. And we use those dollars to empower communities on the ground. We feel like if people own and do and lead their own projects, they'll be sustained for a very long time. And we use grant making as that method. You guys reached out to us, and others have reached out to us in the years since the Bay Plate and the tax checkoff were created to manage money for you, because we're very efficient. 92 cents of every dollar goes to programs, and we have the highest rating in Charity Navigator for decades. And we say these monies go through the trust, not to the trust. So there are 2 programs that will go through the trust this year to tons of other grantees in everyone's communities. So the trust has made grants in everyone's communities here, and also to lots of MML members, as well as Delegate Spiegel. So we anticipate making about 30 or 40 grants in the Urban Trees Grant Program, which is the largest of the share that the trust will manage in this part of the budget. And the other portion will go through the Chesapeake Conservation and Climate Corps, which the Climate Solutions Now Act of 2022 expanded to include climate justice and increase the stipends for the young people in the Corps. So again, the 2 programs today are the Urban Trees Grant Program that will make grants to urban underserved communities for tree planting in their communities, again, led by and driven by the communities on the ground. And the second program is the Chesapeake Conservation and Climate Corps. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but I'm happy to answer questions and save time for my colleagues here on the panel.
We will finish the panel, and then if folks have a question, just hold it, and then we'll do it then, okay? Great. Mr. Fowler.
Thank you, Chairman Lewis and members of the subcommittee. My name is Kirby Fowler. I'm president of the Maryland Zoo, and I'm here to say thanks primarily to the General Assembly, to Governor Moore, to the Board of Public Works and John Gottram, as well as our DLS analyst, Micah Richards. I'm happy to say that we have 423,000 guests this past year. We had guests and members from each one of the counties represented here, but really a highlight of last year was getting the school trips back. We had 60,000 students come into the zoo last year, back to the pre-pandemic levels. 19,000 came from Title I schools. We had 21 of 24 Maryland jurisdictions represented in our school trips, so we are truly the state zoo. Beyond that, I'm very happy to report that we have a 10-year master plan that we've just released. We have ambitious programs that we're already ambitiously working on to bring new animals and new humane habitats to the historic main valley of the zoo. And we're just excited for this next chapter. I started 4 years ago, right when COVID struck, so it was a lot of fun to start at that time, but now I'm 4 years in and I'm ready for the next chapter. Again, appreciate your support, respectfully request your support for the allocation. And again, thank you again. Happy to answer any questions you may have later on.
Thank you. And Lisa.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Harris-Jones, and I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Zoo at Baltimore. And I'm here more for any follow-up information that the committee may need. And again, we're asking for the full funding that the governor has proposed, and we're thanking all of the hard work that went into identifying that. I was hoping that Frank Boston would sit next to me because I grew up with the zoo, living not too far from there. And I think my sister got in trouble because she came home late from dating Frank Boston. And I think they took a trip to the zoo. So as a child of Baltimore, and I'm very excited to represent the zoo, and that my experience is now, it's being shared throughout Maryland. So I thank you.
Thank you, and for the quick comedy. Colleagues, any questions for the trust or for the zoo? Go ahead, Delegate McComas.
No, we don't. The prairie dogs come a little close, but no, we do not. Would you like some? Okay, gotcha. Yes, African penguins. In fact, we're the #1 location in the country for African penguins, 100 plus African penguins. Great, thanks. You're always welcome.
Any further questions? Thank you guys so much. Have a great
Thank you very much.
And the Honorable Mr. Boston, everyone's.
I believe Nancy Hines is coming up to the table with me.
Please.
I will. I've thought about for the record, Frank Boston III on behalf of Signal 13 Foundation of Baltimore, and we're here to support the funding for us. And I thought about my response to the distinguished Miss Lisa Harris-Jones, and I think it's best that I just say I plead the fifth. Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I am a long-term board member of the Signal 13 Foundation. I can honestly say that this board is committed to supporting the men and women of the Baltimore City Police Department and will do whatever it takes to help them in that capacity. The board wants to do so much more for our officers. However, we are limited by our budget, and that's why the state support is so important to us. There are many examples of board members who personally take on projects in the district to help improve the working conditions of our officers. They care that much. They actually spend, in many cases, a lot of dollars of their own personal money just to support the morale and camaraderie of the police department for what they're going through. Grants and scholarships will always be a priority, but the board does other things to help with the morale, including appreciation events, donating refrigerators to 9 districts, and also refilling them monthly, and purchasing a mobile trailer and grill to serve meals to the police officers on patrol. Although Signal 13's support cannot solve all of the issues that are facing policing today, the foundation is a positive presence and a support network for the men and women in the Baltimore Police Department when they need it the most. Thank you.
So my name is Nancy Hines, and thank you, Frank.
Yep,
My name is Nancy Hines, and I'm the CEO of the Signal 13 Foundation. I wanted to call out another board member who is here, Sean O'Connor. He was recently president a year ago, and he did a great job, and he too spends a lot of time and effort with his own money making things right for the police. So I submitted testimony. At least I think I did until you said there were some glitches with the testimony. But I think I've submitted testimony. But I just wanted to spend a moment or two talking about Signal 13 and what Signal 13 does. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary, and the mission then and now remains the same, that we provide support to men and women of the Baltimore Police Department, whether it's through financial hardship grants or college scholarships for their children. So police are proud people. They do not like to ask for help. You can ask any of them, but they, like all of the rest of us, have a hard time paying their monthly bills, and they struggle. So when something unexpected happens, such as an injury on the job or an illness, catastrophic things can happen. So we've had an increasing number of requests, and we rarely turn anyone down. We just helped an officer who had a heart attack on the job, and when I called him to tell him we were giving him a grant, I have never heard anyone so grateful as he was that we were helping him. So unfortunately, we try to do what we can, but as Frank said, we're a small operation. I'm the only full-time employee. And we have a very lean budget. So your state money means a lot to us, and it is very important to our operations. Recently, just to give you an example, Signal 13 helped a female officer who was financially devastated by an abusive husband. And we helped an officer who was shot in the line of duty who needed help at the time. And we helped a young officer whose wife suddenly passed away and left him to care for their 4-year-old daughter, and he was working the overnight shift. So how does that work? He needed help with childcare, which we did. We receive cases like this all the time, and that's, we try to help as much as we possibly can. And then, while grants and scholarships will always be the most important thing we do, the Signal 13 board understands the importance of community policing and increasing the relationship between police and the citizens they serve. That's why the board this morning at our board meeting, our annual board meeting, voted to form a partnership with Project Numa. I don't know if you all are familiar with Project Numa, but it is a social, emotional, and mentoring program for boys in Baltimore City schools between the ages, it's the 4th grade until the 8th grade. And what's integral with this program and what sets it apart from the others is that the relationship between these boys and police is integral to its success. So Damian Cooper is the founder. And they hold these sessions, the after-school sessions at the police academy, and they make sure that the boys are interacting with the police so it becomes a positive relationship. We all know how important it is to hit kids when they are young, and the founder of this group was a victim of gun violence himself, and so he knows the importance of getting to these kids young. So I'm happy to say in closing that thank you for your support, and we are thrilled to have a new partnership with Project Numa, which will help have these kids in Baltimore. Thank you.
And Just for clarification, one point, I'm not here as a lobbyist. I am an actual board member. That's how much I care. Yeah.
Yeah, that is appreciated. I mean, I would just say at the outset, I imagine on the other side of the state, we would love similar programming, getting folks comfortable with law enforcement earlier in life would be important. Colleagues, do you guys have any questions for them? Thank you guys so much. Oh, Delegate McComas, got to be quicker to the draw.
You're going to say that this is policy, but I'm just kind of curious, since you folks are dealing with the kids, do you think in appropriate times in schools that SROs would be helpful to the cause?
What are SROs?
Oh,
School resource officers, which is
Delegate McComas. Yeah.
And I get in trouble because I'm still on judiciary.
That's a big issue. Clearly, Baltimore City's public schools do have their own police department, and it's the Baltimore City School Police, and it's reports to the Board of Education. But the issue there is they're the only police department in the state that can't carry guns in school, and that's a whole nother issue. But although this foundation only supports the Baltimore City Police, and Baltimore City School Police is a whole separate unit. And therefore, to answer your question, no members no police department members, civilians or sworn, that receive our funding are a part of that lodge or part of that school police, so they wouldn't benefit from this, no. Yeah.
Can you turn on your microphone, by the way?
At Harford County, we've been very SRO program.
Yeah.
And in fact, one gentleman saved a child's life and was commendated, but I happened to talk to him at the school, just, chat, and the kids would go by and they loved the guy.
Yes.
I mean, they absolutely loved him.
Yeah, and in most jurisdictions, the primary police department has SROs in the schools. Baltimore City has a whole different police department there. But, I imagine because of the closeness between the city, the police department, and the Baltimore City School Police Department, if there was ever a dire need or something like that, if they made the indirect asks through, the local FOP, it would be something we would at least consider. Yeah.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. That was the last that we had for the Board of Public Works that we had to testify orally. So with that, we're going to move over to the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy. And we're going to start with the analysis by Madeline Miller. You can begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Lewis. My name is Madeline Miller, and today I'll be presenting the DLS analysis of the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy. Previously, the agency was known as the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth, and Victim Services. It was renamed by an executive order issued on January 18th, 2024. The same order also reestablished the Governor's Office for Children. Accordingly, the fiscal 25 allowance transfers approximately $25.9 million in operating expenses and grant funding for the Children's Services Unit to the Governor's Office for Children. This represents 43.9% of the $59 million decrease between the working appropriation and the allowance. The allowance includes $320.4 million. A discussion of the agency's managing for results data begins on page 3. Performance analysis for the agency encompasses its administrative functions, as well as the extent to which GOCPP's contributions result in a reduction in crime across Maryland. Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows select crime statistics in Maryland between calendar 2016 and 2022. While the number of homicide victims, the number of juvenile victims of homicide, and the number of non-fatal shooting victims increased by 35%, 68%, and 31.3% respectively from calendar 2018 to 21. 2 of those measures fell in calendar 22 data. Juvenile victims of homicide rose from 42 to 45, and made up a larger share of all homicide victims, though. GOCPP's performance as a grants administering agency is discussed on pages 5 and 6 with exhibits 2 and 3. GOCPP reports that it funded over 900 subgrants during fiscal 23, which is an increase of approximately 100 compared with fiscal 19. In the same period, the number of monitors working in each fiscal year decreased from approximately 9 to 7.9. Accordingly, the ratio of grants to monitors increased from 88 to 115 and averaged 100.2. Measures that reflect grant performance are shown in Exhibit 3. The percentage of grants considered to be in regular status, which is not identified to be at risk, troubled, or dysfunctional, decreased dramatically from 86% to 21% in fiscal 22 to 23 data. However, the agency reports that grant administration staff were not able to conduct proper risk assessments, which are to be conducted at the beginning of each subgrant. Over 3/4 of subgrants did not have a risk assessment entered in the Grants Management System, or GMS, when it was surveyed in August 23 to report this data point. The number of performance audits completed by GOCPP declined from 12 in fiscal 22 to 0 in fiscal 23, and the agency reports that it's due to having no auditors during most of fiscal 23. One measure in this exhibit has improved. The percentage of closed grants with above average compliance has risen 11 percentage points since fiscal 2019. Now moving to pages 7 through 9. In addition to coordinating public safety resources, performing research, and administering grants, the agency provides direct services through the Victim Services Unit. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Board within VSU is the entity responsible for administering the state's compensation program for victims of crime, persons who've made efforts to prevent crime, and dependent survivors of those individuals. GOCPP also administers the Sexual Assault Reimbursement Unit. The SARU program provides reimbursement related to sexual assault forensic evidence examinations. Exhibit 4 shows CICB claims that were paid in fiscal 2019 through 23. Though the number of eligible claims to CICB increased by 115% from fiscal 2019 to 23, the dollar amount of eligible claims fell 23.4% in the same period. As shown in Exhibit 5, the number of eligible claims processed by SARU was more variable, with under 2,800 claims processed in fiscal 2019, 21, and 23, while over 4,400 were processed in fiscal 2020 and 2022. The dollar amount of eligible claims for SARU moved with the trend in number of eligible claims processed. Moving to the fourth and final observation in the MFR section, youth out-of-home placements. Language in the fiscal 2024 budget bill restricted funds within the agency pending submission of the 2023 out-of-home placements report. Additional discussion of this report can be found in the budget analysis for the Governor's Office for Children and the Department of Human Services, Social Services Administration. The Governor's Office for Children analysis is not yet published. Across all agencies, 6,084 youth experienced at least one out-of-home placement in fiscal 2023, compared with 6,334 in fiscal 2022, which represents a 3.9% decrease. Exhibit 6 details the number of the out-of-home placements per 1,000 youth by jurisdiction. GOCPP, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Juvenile Services, the Maryland Department of Health, Developmental Disabilities Administration, and the Maryland State Department of Education have substantially fulfilled the requirements set forth by the budget language. DLS therefore recommends that $100,000 in withheld funds for each of the agencies be released, and will process a letter to this effect if no objections are raised during the hearing. A discussion of the working appropriation begins on page 12. Several actions have altered the agency's budget since July 1. Approximately $856,000 in federal ARPA funds were added in connection to the Department of Juvenile Services-led Safe Summer Initiative. Funding through GOCPP provided grants to 10 local management boards and funding for Title II Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention grants for our Amina Freedom Initiative and the Anne Arundel County Partnership for Children, Youth, and Families. Additional ARPA funds were added for the Evidence Review Unit of the Office of the State's Attorney for Baltimore City and for emergency assistance to the Securing Against Hate Crimes grant program. These budget amendments added $1.7 million and $1 million respectively, and the funds for the SAHC are not yet reflected in the working appropriation. The agency's budget also grew in connection to Section 19 of the fiscal 2024 budget bill. Approximately $5.4 million in general funds were added for 14 grants. The agency reports that all grant agreements are in place and are being awarded as expected. The allowance does not continue the funding of any of these items, which are listed on page 13 of the document. One of the items on page 13 increased funding for the Young Readers Matching Grant Program by $250,000. Chapters 649 and 650 of 2023 transfer the Baltimore City Young Readers Program and the Young Readers Matching Grant Program from the agency to the Maryland State Library Agency. The fiscal 24 working appropriation includes approximately $750,000 for both programs in the GOCPP budget, and GOCPP will administer and disperse the funds in fiscal 2024. In the fiscal 25 proposed budget, both programs are budgeted under MSLA. The final change to fiscal 2024 is a proposed deficiency of $79,000 in general funds to support the addition of one position transferred from the Department of Service and Civic Innovation. A discussion of the allowance begins on page 15 with an overview of spending by program in Exhibit 7. The headquarters program accounts for 32.8% of the total budget, and approximately 58.5% of the allowance is appropriated for various local law enforcement grants, including the annual allocation of the formula-based SAP fund, or State Aid for Police Protection Fund. The remaining programs make up less than 9% of the allowance. The change in the allowance is detailed in Exhibit 8, starting on page 17. Overall, the budget decreases by $59 million, driven primarily by the removal of the Children's Services Unit and the removal of authorization to spend Federal Victims of Crime Act funds. These decreases are offset by growth in funding for a net increase of 16 positions and salary enhancements. As is typical for the agency, changes in the budget are driven by grant programming decisions. They accounted for a net decrease of $32.3 million between the years, excluding the amounts associated with the CSU. One grant program is impacted by the BRFA. Chapter 174 of 2022 established a mandated appropriation of $2 million for warrants and absconding grants. Provision in the BRFA reduces the mandate to $1 million annually in fiscal 25 and 26. The agency reports that it has received limited requests for the funding in its first year and anticipates that this reduction would have little impact on program outcomes in fiscal 25. The budget also changes in a couple ways related to the final year of planned enhanced public safety funding. That initiative sought to increase spending by over $500 million across 4 fiscal years. The funding provided for police accountability grants is reduced from $8 million in fiscal 24 to $4 million in fiscal 25, and the enhancement funding for the State Aid for Police Protection Program was increased by another $5 million in general funds. SAP funds include a statutory funding formula amount and an amount labeled the enhancement funding in fiscal years 23 through 25. Funding under the formula decreases by approximately $318,000. And then in fiscal 23 and 24, the $45.9 million enhancement was shared by all jurisdictions, including Baltimore City. Baltimore City does not receive funding under the statutory formula component of SAP. The fiscal 25 allowance provides an additional $5 million for a total of $50.9 million. It is not clear why the additional enhancement funding is needed. DLS recommends deleting the $5 million in additional SAP enhancement funds. Exhibit 9 shows how the enhancement is currently distributed in fiscal 25, and there's detail by jurisdiction that would be provided using violent crime measures from calendar 2022. This is consistent with the policy decision made through the previous 2 budgets to use the most recently available violent crime measures to allocate the SAP enhancement. The allowance also changes due to a decrease in authorized federal fund expenditure associated with the VOCA. Chapters 625 and 626 of 2023 require that adequate general funds be provided in the budget so that $60 million is made available for the program each year. This mandate begins in fiscal 25. An additional discussion of the funds can be found in the issue section of this analysis. This reduction in approved federal expenditure reflects that there's no longer a federal fund balance for the agency to be drawing down upon. It is not to say that this is the year in which revenue from the federal government has decreased. An overview of the agency's personnel complement appears on page 21. Of the agency's current 69 regular positions, 12 are vacant, resulting in a vacancy rate of 17.4%. With the removal of the Children's Services Unit in fiscal 25, 4 positions will leave the agency for the Governor's Office for Children. And then in fiscal 25, the agency receives 20 new regular positions. The new positions include 3 agency grant specialists, supervisors, 14 agency grant specialists, and 3 fiscal services officers. The allowance reflects the reduction of 5.25 contractual full-time equivalents, 4 of which are filled positions. So only 16, therefore, should be considered vacant in fiscal 2025. Funding for the 16 vacant positions does not reflect the standard 25% turnover rate that is typically applied to account for time to hire staff, and DLS recommends increasing the turnover rate for those 16 positions. There are 3 issues, which begin on page 22. The first relates to grant oversight. The agency's grant programming comprises 96% of its budget. One of the ways in which performance is measured by the agency is the percentage of general and federal funding that it was returned by subrecipients. Though it is not solely a reflection of the agency's performance, it speaks to the agency's ability to award funding at the appropriate level and support its subrecipients. As shown in Exhibit 10, down on the bottom of page 22, both measures fell in fiscal 23 compared to fiscal 22, when 7.8% of federal and 8% of general funds went unused. In fiscal 23, subrecipients returned 4% and 4.3% of federal and general funds that GOC provided them, respectively. One ongoing issue for the agency relates to their closeout processes and the size of its reversions and fund cancellations. Some funds were still accidentally reverted in fiscal 23 closeout, including the deficiency appropriation that had been provided for the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board. The agency reports that it began implementing a corrective action plan for its grants management processes in late fiscal 2022. The action plan is the result of an audit first required by the fiscal 2022 budget bill. That requirement included, or the agency's corrective action plan included responses to 6 recommendations from the auditor. Some of the actions that GOCP planned to take to implement the plan included updating its monitoring methodology, tracking additional grant activity and reports, and performing reconciliations between the FEMIS, or Financial Management Information System, and the agency's own GMS on a monthly basis. Following the submission of the agency's report on June 7th, the Budget Committee has released half of the withheld funds and asked the agency to submit a follow-up report by November 1st. The agency submitted the report without demonstrating how the plan had been implemented, and on February 9th, the agency submitted additional information to DLS that demonstrates how the agency has fulfilled elements of the plan. However, this information has not been resubmitted to the Budget Committees through the process for requesting the release of withheld funds. One of the auditor's recommendations was that the agency perform a time study of individual processes to determine what the appropriate level of staffing would be. The agency did not perform a time study, but instead compared its workloads to peer institutions, and its findings support the addition of grant specialists, like are included in the allowance. If the 14 positions were added to the 7.86 that GOCPP had during fiscal 23, the ratio of grants to monitors would have been 41-1 instead of 115-1. The second issue relates to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Board and Fund. The CICF is a special fund from which compensation under CICB claims is paid. The CICF is supported by revenues from the judiciary and a few other fund sources. As noted in Exhibit 11, annual CICF revenues collected by the judiciary have ranged from 1.5 to 1.9 million in recent years. Revenue from this source used to be higher. Between fiscal 26 through 2019, it exceeded 2.4 million annually, and for fiscal 2012 through 2015, revenues exceeded 3.1 million. Federal funds from the Crime Victims Fund also support CICB operations. Those are VOCA compensation funds as opposed to VOCA assistance funds, which are given out through another program in the agency. Those VOCA compensation funds are calculated as a percentage of the amount of compensation awarded during the federal fiscal year 2 years prior. And so that an explanation of that formula is provided in Exhibit 12 on page 25. In the 10 most recent federal award cycles, the state has received about between 1.1 million and 1.8 million each year from that fund source. In addition to the special funds that are collected from the judiciary and the federal funds, CICB can spend general funds. Supplemental budget number 2 of the previous budget added a $2.3 million deficiency to support claims expenditures. In closeout, the agency reverted the $2.3 million. Expenditure information and information about the special funds balance is shown in Exhibit 13 on page 26. That information suggests that if the agency had spent or otherwise encumbered the general funds, that the special fund would not have ended the fiscal year with a negative fund balance. Current staff do not have an explanation as to why the supplemental funding was returned. According to the agency, no CICF balance is anticipated at the end of fiscal 25. And as noted in the CICB's annual report, resource needs for the Victim Services Unit and CICB specifically are dire. GOCPP should comment on its ability to compensate victims of crime in the remainder of fiscal 24 and how it will resolve the negative balance. The most recent OLA, Office of Legislative Audit's fiscal compliance for CICB was published in November 2018 and covered the period when CICB was part of DPSCS. The next time it would be covered would be under an analysis of the GOCPP budget. The statute requires the publication of an annual report. There is no prescribed due date, and so in order to ensure that information about the board's operations and budgetary concerns are promptly reported to the General Assembly, the OLS recommends that $100,000 in general funds be withheld pending the publication of the next annual report by November 1st, 2024. I would also note that if enacted, SB 471 or HB 575 would significantly increase CICB expenditures beginning in fiscal 2026 and would likely require general fund support. The fiscal notes for the bills anticipate that administrative expenses alone would increase by approximately $1 million, and it is not yet possible to predict how much claims paid would grow. The third and final issue relates to the VOCA mandated level of spending. Exhibit 14 shows the federal awards received each year from federal fiscal 2016 to 2023. Since federal fiscal 2018, annual awards to the state have declined. The federal fiscal 23 award was $24.7 million, approximately 40.4% of the federal fiscal 2018 level. The 23 award will be used in combination with general funds to make $60 million in grants available for fiscal 25 in accordance with chapters 625 and 626. Funding in the allowance suggests that the general fund contribution to the $60 million mandate will remain level with the working appropriation, and GOCPP should comment on whether the $60 million is inclusive of administrative costs, or if $60 million is the precise amount to be provided as grant funding only. Language in the previous budget bill specified that the award will be for 9 months and required the state 2024 VOCA awards to be awarded at a prorated level equal to that of fiscal 2023. Funds not needed to provide continuation funding for the prorated 9 months were then used to offer competitive awards. There were 171 continuation awards that totaled $37.6 million and 58 competitive awards that totaled $12.5 million. The fiscal 24 budget represents the 6th year of continuation funding. and that non-state victim services providers have been eligible to receive. Information about the funding of the VOCA program is shown in Exhibit 15. Additional language from the last year required that the office submit 2 reports on VOCA grant award data and a letter to the budget committees. $1.25 million in funding has previously been released to the agency, but some funding remains withheld pending the submission of information on the competitively awarded grants. The agency provided the requested information, and DLS therefore recommends the release of withheld funds and will process a letter if no objections are raised during the budget hearings. As VOCA funding and expenditure remains of great importance to the state, DLS recommends adding budget language restricting funds pending the submission of 2 reports and a letter on the program's proposed awards, actual expenditures, available funding, and program outcomes. The DLS recommended actions are listed beginning on page 30. Pages 34 through 42 are dedicated to the appendices. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
I imagine Madeline needs a minute to catch her breath. Thank you for that thorough overview. Colleagues, are there any questions for Madeline? All right, thank you so much. With that, Executive Director Dorothy Lenig and your team can approach and begin your panel when you are ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the subcommittee. My name is Dorothy Lenig. I'm the Executive Director of the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention and Policy, as you know, formerly known as the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services. And yes, you can call it GOCAP again. The initials are slightly different, but you can still call it that. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the subcommittee today as you review our proposed budget. We're grateful and thank our DLS analyst, Ms. Madeline Miller, for her thoughtful and thorough analysis. We really appreciate it. I'm not going to repeat about the governor's executive order. Ms. Miller already spoke about it. I did just want to say that the comments that I make about FY24 reflect both GOCAP and GOC, but going forward into 25, it's just GOCAP as the agencies have been separated. I'd like to start by introducing my panel today with Sylvia Senkus, who's our CFO, Bethany Young, who's our Policy and Legislation Director, Justice Schisler, who's the Director of Programs and Grants, and I also wanted to introduce Michelle Green, our auditor. We do have an auditor now, and Arenze Ifakauchi, our Communications Director. And I'm grateful to our management team who are all committed to rebuilding GOCAP and serving as a coordinating office that advises the governor on criminal justice strategy. I'm very excited that I feel that the agency is coming back together in its full form. A significant part of GOCAP's work is making grants to law enforcement, victims, and children-serving agencies, as we're committed to awarding those funds fairly, equitably, in accordance with the governor's public safety priorities. We're also committed to grant transparency, and toward that end, GOCAP developed an interactive map that's posted on our website that shows all of our grant awards by the name of the grant, the awardee, the amount, what the funds are used for, and how to contact the awardee. As you can see from my written testimony, I hope you have it now, for the most part, we concur with the DLS analysis, and I'll speak to the issues that DLS asked us to comment on. With respect to the State Aid for Police Protection, or SAP, GOCAP disagrees. GOCAP supports the governor's proposed budget. SAP is a very flexible funding source for local law enforcement because it has a less restrictive criteria and reporting requirements. It allows local law enforcement agencies, both large and small, to put their money to the highest use that they feel that they need. With respect to the Criminal Injuries Compensation Program, we've been asked to comment on our ability to compensate victims of crime for the remainder of the fiscal year and also on the funds being withheld. CICB will continue to compensate victims of crime in the remainder of FY24, and we will continue to monitor the situation and work with DBM to address any issues that arise. GOCAP concurs with the recommendation to submit a report, but respectfully disagrees with the restriction of funds. For the VOCA award, you asked us to comment, DLS asked us to comment on the precise dollar amount that we expect to put out on the street. For FY25, GOCAP expects to provide $60 million in grant funding to subrecipients. This is possible by using prior year's deobligated funds. GOCAP will use the 5% of the federal award as our administrative costs, towards our administrative costs. Also, with respect to VOCA and the recommendation that we submit 2 reports and a letter on the program, GOCAP concurs with the recommendation to report, but respectfully disagrees on the reporting requirements and the restriction of the funds. With the VOCA-NOFA being competitive in FY25, much of the data that's requested in the 3 reports is no longer needed. Additional reporting requirements take critical time away from awarding and monitoring subrecipients. GOCAP is requesting to submit 1 comprehensive annual report due on November 1st, 2024 that includes most of the information that was requested. So we would submit a report that has a comprehensive list of all the awards made for FY25, the subrecipient's name, the award amount, the grant dates, the funding source, whether it was VOCA federal or state. We would submit a comprehensive list of the awards in FY24 with the same information, the total amount of the awards from VOCA federal and state for FY25, and the total awards that were made in the prior year. Providing 1 comprehensive report provides the transparency GOCAP's committed to and allows staff to focus on core functions of administering funds and providing technical assistance to ensure compliance. It will help to ensure NOFAs and awards are made in a timely basis and staff are available to support funded projects. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dorothy. Colleagues, are there questions? I will begin to my left with Delegate Spiegel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for all you do and for your presentation. I wanted to ask about the Victim Services Stabilization Act, which was passed last year, which, as I understand it, among other things, makes it so that state funds can be used by awardees as a match to access federal VOCA funds. And it's my understanding the impetus for that law was that programs were not able to access enough funds to address the needs of their victim clients because they couldn't meet the federal match themselves. And as I understand it, I could be wrong, that's a separate issue from the mandated overall level of $60 million in VOCA spending. So I wanted to ask how GOCAP is planning to address that issue in fiscal 2025 of awardees having access to state funding to be able to meet the federal funding match and unlock more resources for victims.
So what our plan is in the application to ask the subrecipients to identify whether or not they have the match. So if you have a really large organization, I worked at the House of Ruth for 35 years, we didn't have any trouble meeting the match. So if you can meet the match, those are the programs we're planning to award the federal money to. And the smaller programs that can't, that's who we would be awarding the state money to.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Ivey.
Waiting for, there we go. I could say it all again for the record. I really appreciate you being here. So it was suggested that $5 million be withheld, and you said that you disagree with that. Could you talk to us about what are those $5 million being used on right now? What would that look like?
For the SAP money?
Sure, yes.
So the governor put an additional $5 million into the SAP funding. SAP it's a formula funding that goes to every local law enforcement agency in the state, and we support the governor's budget. The great thing about SAP funding is it's very flexible. So if you have maybe a smaller law enforcement agency that has a different need than a large law enforcement agency, they could use it in the way that's most helpful to them.
Okay. All right. I appreciate it. I just wanted to get on the record, looking to see if there's any sort of impact that would be associated with those dollars being withheld.
I think the more, the more restricted the money is, the less flexible it is for an agency. And again, if some agency may have some need, another agency has a different need, and so this gives them the flexibility to figure it out.
Okay. There's like a small department in a small municipality needs help finding an additional officer or something like that. They could apply for this type of funding.
This money is formula funding, so the formula is based on the crime rate.
Yeah.
I think it's based on the violent crime rate, so it comes to us divided up. We really just award it out, but it would increase the total amount that gets awarded out. The formula remains the same. So they would get more money than they got last year.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No worries. Committee Vice Chair, Delegate Chain.
Great. Thank you very much for being here. The subcommittee and also committee has heard from different groups that about the grants that are awarded being on a quarterly basis rather than a monthly basis. And I was wondering if there could be an explanation provided for that.
So the way VOCA works is that for the agencies that are getting at least $50,000, we can make a monthly reimbursement. For the rest of our grants, we're reimbursing quarterly because it's extremely time-consuming to make the reimbursements. And so that's why we do it on a quarterly basis. But we still can do it for VOCA on a monthly basis for the larger grants.
Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the feedback and the thought process on that. It sounds like that, I mean, for these groups out there, that as far as like forecasting and being able to plan and have the cash flow, sustainable, I think that's the kind of feedback we've been receiving as far as the change from the monthly to the quarterly.
So we wouldn't change it for the nonprofits under VOCA.
Okay.
VOCA would stay the same, the way it is now.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Any further questions, colleagues? So I have two. So the first is with the additional positions. We are really looking forward to the additional grant specialists coming in, so those caseloads are more manageable for your staff, as well as can be more responsive to the public. I know there's been some challenges in just recruiting people and getting them in. Can you speak a little bit to how's that going so far, or what things you guys are doing differently in order to bring folks in-house?
So because the budget doesn't start until July 1st, we can't actually hire people until July 1st. The budget has to be approved and finished, but we do want to start recruiting now so that we can get people lined up, potentially to start on July 1st. We're really excited about that. I think recruiting, training, hiring, retaining is hard for everybody everywhere, but we're going to do the best we can to get people in place.
Yeah, we're looking forward to following that and supporting you with it. The last thing, of course, the last 6 years, there have been, I would say, fixed formula spending for a lot of the VOCA funds, and you're proposing moving to a competitive grant. I understand you probably can't share everything, but can you share a little bit of what goes into that, the decision process on the competitive, like how will you rate organizations to make some of the folks who've been so dependent upon this fixed funding whole? I understand some things you may not be able to share, but whatever you can for folks to hear would be appreciated.
Well, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to talk a little bit about why we made the decision, just so everybody's on the same page. And then
you are indulged.
I'll answer the question. So this is a really important question. VOCA's probably GOCAP's most visible grant. And when I began this position, we knew we really wanted to get it right. And so the grant staff and the management staff spent a lot of time thinking about how should we make that happen. And what we realized is that after 6 years of competitive funding, that not all the money was being distributed in a way that we felt was fair and equitable and going to the highest level of victim services. And the federal VOCA, we are encouraged to put it out as a competitive process. And so we wanted to make sure that when we looked across the board that we were getting the money not only to the agencies that are doing really amazing work now, but making sure we were opening it up to either agencies who missed out 6 years ago. I think there's 6 child advocacy centers were not in then, so they weren't getting money. We wanted to make sure that existing programs that were doing new, incredibly great work could have the opportunity to ask for more money. And some programs that maybe shrunk, maybe because of the pandemic or whatever happened, we could reduce some of their funding. We don't want to harm any group that's doing good work. And so what we decided to do was give bonus points for various things. So if you're an existing program, you'll get some bonus points. If you're a sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse center, the statewide approved ones, you'll get bonus points. If you attended our technical review process, you'll get bonus points. We want to make sure that the money's getting to the agencies and to the services that I'm guessing that if we all read the applications, we would agree would be the programs we want to support. So we're not out to harm anybody. We're out to make sure the money's getting to those programs and to some of the newer programs and being able to give more money to the programs that need it.
I really appreciate kind of like walking through the process. One, that this is, partially what you said, encouraged by the federal government too, of which we received some of our VOCA funds. Of course, the state has added its own now. I imagine it's also to tighten up the spending, right? To make sure, as you referenced, that the VOCA money is going to the core programs and services that we want. If you are able, can you touch on some type of things that I think you've identified that may be used that probably shouldn't be used on, just for, the record?
So some of the things that we identified were in the area of public relations and marketing. So maybe some outreach is good, but if the vast majority of your money is going to public relation, marketing, communication, and social media, we didn't think that was the highest use. So you might have an agency that was providing a lot of direct service 6 years ago. Maybe they're not providing as much, so they've pushed the money to some of the staff positions that are not really direct client service anymore. We found a program that had monthly vehicle detailing, probably not the highest level of use. We have a whole list of things. I don't really want to call people out on it, but I think we'd all agree that we would rather have it be to a victim advocate or a counselor or somebody who's more in the victim service role. These are all important things that agencies are paying for. I'm just not sure it's the highest use of VOCA funding.
Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions? We appreciate you guys' testimony. And we do have a few folks who are here to a favorable testimony in support. I'm going to start with Wendy Myers of the Maryland Children's Alliance, Alicia Bickoff of Agency of the Associated, Jewish Community Federation of Baltimore, Amanda Rodriguez from Turnaround, as well as Lisa Jordan from MCASA, Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. Y'all can begin in whichever order most comfortable. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Wendy Myers, and I'm the Executive Director of Maryland Children's Alliance, MCA. And MCA is the statewide chapter, which serves as the convener of Maryland's 24 Child Advocacy Centers, or CACs. CACs serve child victims of physical, sexual abuse, exploitation, and trafficking. Thank you so much for your time and for your consideration of our budget request. Prior to my role at Maryland Children's Alliance, I actually was the executive director of one of our 24 CACs in the state. And I did that for 16 years. So I know a lot about how it feels to stretch a budget and attempt to provide services for our kids. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what's been happening in our CACs. Thanks in part to the leadership of this committee last year, CACs received an increase of $100,000 for FY24, which raised the total state funding for CACs to $400,000 in the GOCAP budget. Unfortunately, we couldn't celebrate this increase for very long because CACs were cut by that $100,000 in the governor's proposed budget as part of that rebasing that was done for programs. So this cut essentially reduced our CAC state budget back to the $300,000 for fiscal year 25. So we understand the difficult budget choices you have to make this year. We certainly do. However, I come to you on behalf of Maryland's 24 CACs and the 5,000 to 6,000 children that they will serve collectively this year. I respectfully request two commitments from you to restore the $100,000 that was cut from the governor's proposed budget, and then two, to fund the CACs at an additional $250,000 for FY25. This would bring the CACs in Maryland to $650,000 in state funding annually. There's also a business case for funding for CACs. According to a study by the University of Maryland in 2021, for every dollar that is spent on CAC services, the state actually saves $663 on other services. Between 2016 and 2022, Maryland CACs provided services to 37,429 children, and that would be for sexual abuse, physical abuse, exploitation, and or trafficking. In 2023, Maryland CACs served 5,138 children. This means that last year the state of Maryland funded CACs at $77.85 per child victim served. Given the rise in demand for services and the need to invest in the services CACs provide, we respectfully request an increase in the annual state investment to child advocacy centers to $650,000 total to offset the cut in the proposed budget and to give much needed increases to CACs that are really struggling to support our most vulnerable children. On behalf of our 24 local child advocacy centers, our network of multidisciplinary teams, and the children and families we serve, thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Alicia Bickoff, and I'm the Deputy Director of HANA, an agency of the Associated Jewish Community Federation of Baltimore. I'm testifying in favor of including the Grants for Domestic Violence Center grant funding into the budget. This is also known as the GDVC funding. HANA is a domestic violence, sexual abuse, and elder abuse agency that serves Baltimore County and Baltimore City. HANA provides safety planning, supportive advocacy, shelter, crisis intervention, case management, and legal advocacy. As a culturally responsive program, we incorporate the client's cultural and religious experiences and practices into every service that we provide. HANA relies heavily on government grants that are administered by GOCAP to provide life-saving services to victims. We are grateful for this committee support that recognizes the need for sufficient and stabilized funding for our program. The need for funding for domestic violence service providers is greater than ever, as the demand for our services has reached unprecedented levels. In fiscal year 22, HANA experienced a 92% increase in calls for service, with an additional 25% increase in fiscal year 23. Since the pandemic, victims have experienced more severe, frequent, and lethal abuse than ever before. More victims are calling for services with substantially more complicated needs. In addition to needing safety planning, crisis intervention, and counseling, victims are also struggling with housing, food instability, and long-term mental health support, as well as legal representation. Simply put, there are more victims with greater needs and not enough resources to go around. To address these needs, our skilled staff spend more time advocating for each and every victim. As the demand for our services only continues to rise, so does the need for continued funding. In FY23, HANA received funds from GDVC program as a community-based victim services provider. The primary purpose of these funds was to develop and strengthen family violence victim services. These funds directly supported a full-time advocate who works with clients across the lifespan. In FY24, these funds were not available to HANA as a culturally responsive community-based program because they were not administered through a competitive process. We appreciate the limited available state resources, and even if the GDVC funds are at the same level as FY24, we would encourage it to be a competitive process so that all victim services providers have access to those funds.
Thank you, Alicia. Amanda?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Amanda Rodriguez. I'm the Executive Director of Turnaround. We are the Rape Crisis Center, a comprehensive domestic violence provider, and the Regional Navigator for Greater Baltimore. We serve Baltimore County, Baltimore City, and Howard County with these services. During COVID, we saw a significant increase of need across our community. In fact, our lethality assessment program rose in the thousands of %. That's the test that law enforcement typically do. It can also be other partners to assess whether or not someone is more likely to die as a result of their domestic violence situation. We also had an increase of 300% of calls into our Office for Services, and we're at this point at 10,000 calls for service into the agency. We continue to see more complicated cases, as Ms. Bickoff spoke to. We have more cases where there's multiple victimization. So someone's coming to us and they have sexual violence and human trafficking, or sexual violence and domestic violence as part of why they're coming to turnaround. They also have, we have seen higher levels of strangulation and the need for more expanded services. So someone coming to us may need shelter, and then additionally may also need legal services and case management, education, and we also serve through employment readiness classes. We've also seen the poverty level of those that we serve increase by 12% to 70% of those that we serve are living under the poverty line when we begin service. Additionally, we've struggled to maintain staffing because, as everyone saw, the job market has gone in a direction where salaries have raised exponentially almost overnight, which means that we were needing to struggle very quickly to catch up with what salary ranges currently were. We're continuing to attempt to do that, which it's only made more complicated when grant funds are unstable or if they're inconsistent. To maintain services at Turnaround, we have to raise nearly $1 million every single year just to maintain the current levels of funding that we have. This is outside of the government funds that we receive. We also have reimbursable grants, which Delegate Chang so eloquently put, are required. So we have to expend money prior to asking for the money back. In some cases, it's as many as 3 months we are waiting for those reimbursable funds if the reimbursement is quarterly, which means we need to have a platform of funding to ensure that services are stable. For a larger program like Turnaround, that is not necessarily the most difficult thing, but it does create more and more difficulty for smaller programs that do similar work like Turnaround throughout the state. Although I am more confident in GOCAP's leadership under this administration than I have been ever before, as a core service agency, my community relies on the life-saving services that we provide at Turnaround. Those can only be offered if we have stability and consistency with our funding. It's not just important, this is vital to us to be able to continue our work. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Amanda. Lisa Jordan.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Lisa Jordan with the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. We're the federally recognized state sexual assault coalition, and we're also embedded in state law. So partnership is actually embedded in our state law. GOCAP's required to collaborate and consult with CASA. I do want to start out by saying that we are so excited about the partnership with the governor, with the lieutenant governor, with the new team at GOCAP. We are really very glad to be helping to put the agency back together. That being said, we are also aware of our different roles. Your oversight role, our role to tell you about what some of the needs are in the field, and I know they don't always align, so I'm going to have what I would like to refer to as 3 gentle suggestions. One is about the sexual assault rape crisis funding. There's a missing $780,000. There's formula funding. It was actually then Delegate Aruna Miller's bill that requires funding for rape crisis centers. Ms. Miller is just an amazing budget analyst. She and I have not been able to determine if that money is there. So that could potentially be a $780,000 cut, and we'd like to make sure that that's not happening. I also want to say thank you to the General Assembly for the $1 million allocation last year from the Question 1 money. That's not there this year. If it's at all possible, I know it's a tough budget year, but this money is going to really good use. The second thing that I'd like to gently suggest, Delegate Chang, thank you for the question about quarterly versus monthly. It is not really, the change from monthly to quarterly just happened. That just happened this fall. So prior to that, for years, all of the grants, including VOCA and the other grants, were reimbursed on a monthly basis. And so we have Violence Against Women Act funding, we have general funding, there's a lot of funding, and programs are really not able to be a bank for the state of Maryland and front what amounts to 4 months of funding. Our staffs don't get paid quarterly, our landlords don't get paid quarterly. we really need to have a little bit more cash flow. Now, we did approach new leadership at GoCap, and I was really disappointed to get a response that basically said if we couldn't do that, there was something wrong with the program and maybe we needed more financial oversight. So we are asking that the committee step in and require monthly funding for all of the bigger grants to nonprofit organizations. The last thing, if I may, Mr. Chair, I just want to talk about the VOCA issue a little bit. It's not entirely transparent about how these bonus points are going to be used. That might work, but we've not really learned about how the bonus points are going to be used. And it's not just, Mr. Chairman, the last 6 years, but over the last 20 years, VOCA has generally been core services. We are not at all suggesting that all grants be continuation. We absolutely believe new grantees, getting rid of some of the issues that Ms. Lennick referred to are totally appropriate, but we are asking that this committee consider continuation plus some set amount for the people who are really core providers, for HANA, for the domestic violence programs, for the sexual assault programs, for the child advocacy programs, because I think there needs to be more conversation. The new leadership just got there. The law that you passed is so fabulous, the Victim Services Stabilization Act. It's a national model, but it also requires that the agency consult with a wide range of people. And I do think it's appropriate to have some core services. That's what we do for legal services in the state of Maryland. And I do think that we need to think about, you need to think about whether it is helpful for survivors to know that some programs are going to continue. Because I'd like to be out of a job, but rape is not going away. Domestic violence is not going away. These are not project-based services. These are continuing needs, and there needs to be some continuing funding. So we're asking for a middle road on the competitive versus continuation. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for traveling so far. Colleagues, do you all have any questions for them? Delegate McComas.
Ms. Jordan, have you seen an increase in the domestic violence within the last few years and sexual assault as opposed to, let's say, when things were just quieter, because you've been doing this for a very long time?
Yeah, thank you, Delegate McComas. Absolutely. The programs are seeing enormous increases. One program reported a 52% increase just last year. And it's not only an increase in the overall incidence, but it's also just like in how complicated things are. So in particular, we're seeing more and more coexisting issues with substance abuse, with domestic violence against, say, mom, sexual abuse against the kids, plus financial exploitation. So there are more cases and they're more complicated.
The other question is, I know that in your work you try to do best practices. Is other programs in other states, do they do the payroll? They give the grant monthly as opposed to quarterly to their agencies that they're giving funding to?
So I don't have a comparison state to state, but I can tell you about the federal government. The federal government allows you to request funds. I believe it's at least twice a month. You're able to request not only your reimbursement, but also anything you're going to expend in the next 10 days. So say I had payroll on Friday, I would be able to include that. And just for perspective, the other day my finance director sent me something to approve, and I sent it back to her at about 8:30 in the morning before I left for Annapolis. We had it in the bank account by noon. So this idea that it is somehow too complicated to do, I would ask that maybe those practices are looked at. I'm not saying there should be a 4-hour turnaround. It was great, but I also don't think that 4 months of fronting money is appropriate. I'll also say that we did talk specifically to the Comptroller Learman, and she says she absolutely can do the monthly reimbursements. So So we're very concerned about that. We're very concerned about the stability generally. I do. I understand the issues. We are not asking for 100% continuation at all. But in the past, not just the past 6 years, going back 20 years, there haven't been that many times where it's been competitive. And I think this is a huge change. A middle road, some competitive, some continuation is something we really hope the committee will consider.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No problem. Thank you guys for your testimony. We really appreciate it. All right, have a great day. With that, I think we have one more. Melanie Shapiro, Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. Melanie Shapiro, I'm the Public Policy Director with the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. We are the federally recognized state domestic violence coalition. You actually heard two of our member programs just testify. Ms. Rodriguez at Turnaround is the Executive Director of Turnaround, which is the Baltimore County Comprehensive Program. We also represent culturally specific programs and other domestic violence service providers like HANA, which Ms. Bickoff is from. To Delegate McComas, to your question, since January 1st of this year, there have been over 630 calls to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. It is mid-February. There have been 910 final orders of protection issued in Maryland in just January of 2024. In fiscal year 2022, the domestic violence grant, DOMV, there were over 23,000 victims provided with supportive services by the 19 comprehensive domestic violence programs. And through our national network to end domestic violence, we do a one-day snapshot. Last year's one-day snapshot, there were over 1,000 victims served in just one day in the state of Maryland, which is a 32% increase from the prior year. So domestic violence is absolutely up. And unfortunately, because this budget that is before you today does not include the Domestic Violence Centers Grant, which this body has added the last 2 years. Last year was at $1 million. 2 years ago was at $3 million. Our budget is in essence cut by a third. There is legislation in the works to hopefully stabilize some of the domestic violence funding. Thank you, Vice Chair Ivey, for that. But what is really needed and what you have heard is the reliable, stable, predictable funding for domestic violence programs. They need to be able to plan, they need to be able to hire, and they need to be able to retain staff. One of the challenges with that is that victim service providers, their staff can make as much, if not more money, working at Starbucks or McDonald's than they can at the programs. And it's very challenging work. It's very traumatizing work for many people. It's their life's work. But it is a challenge when you can literally go down the street and make the same amount of money working in a much easier capacity job. I would also just raise the point that there's several $1 million of ARPA grant funds, and the programs are looking at an ARPA cliff, which is going to happen in FY25. That money is going to run out. And some of the programs are depending on those dollars to pay for staff. Some of them are using it to pay for shelters. They're using it to pay for the victim services, and that money is going to run out. So as you're looking at the budget and as you're looking at where those funds need to get allocated, keeping that in mind so that the victim service providers who have those dollars, they do go, it was a competitive grant process that MNADV administered, and they are going to the domestic violence service providers, but that money is going to run out. So I thank you for all of you do. I thank you for the VOCA stabilization, which is tremendous. We work very closely with GOCAP, but we unfortunately are in a place where the $2 million that is allocated in the annual budget, which has not changed for at least 10 years, dedicated solely to domestic violence, needs to increase. And so that is our request as you're looking at this year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shapiro. Colleagues, any questions? We appreciate your patience. Thank you guys so much. All right, that is the last oral testimony we have for the Office of Crime Prevention. Thank you guys so much. With that, we're going to move over to Department of Corrections. Thank you, Madeline, for your analysis. Jacob Cash, you can begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Jacob Cash, and I'm a policy analyst with the Department of Legislative Services. And today I'll be providing the budget analysis for the corrections function within the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. This unit includes the Division of Corrections, as well as the Patuxent Institution for Psychiatric Cases, and Maryland Correctional Enterprises, which is the prison industry arm of the department. Beginning on the cover page, the fiscal 2025 budget is $1 billion, and there was an increase of about $6 million, or less than 1%. Moving to the population discussion, Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows that there has been an increase in the incarcerated population in the last year, and that has continued, if not accelerated, so far in fiscal 2024. Exhibit 2 projects the total correctional and Patuxent population using pre-pandemic trends as well as post-pandemic trends. The dotted line represents pre-pandemic trends and would have been expected to be higher than the current population at this time. However, the two trend lines are converging at around June of 2025 if current trends continue. At that point, it would be unclear what we would expect the population to either increase or decrease. Moving to Exhibit 4 on page 7, average length of stay for incarcerated individuals has decreased from the peak in fiscal 2021, but it still remains above pre-pandemic levels. Part of this is explained by the following exhibit, Exhibit 5 on page 8, that shows that most of the population is in custody for a sentence of over 15 years or of life, with 8,018 individuals serving sentences longer than 15 years and 2,171 incarcerated for life sentences. A growing share of the population is for those with sentences under 2.5 years, as well as those with sentences between 5 and 8 years. Overall, about 72% of those incarcerated within DPSCS facilities were there for a most serious offense that was a violent crime, whereas about 6% were incarcerated for property crimes as their most serious offense. Weapons violations, and to a lesser extent drug offenses and non-assault sexual crimes, made up significant sources of incarceration as well. Moving on to assaults, Exhibit 6 on page 9 shows that the Division of Corrections nearly met their goal of no more than 4.1 individual-on-individual assaults per 100 ADP, and they did meet the goal of no more than 1.6 individual-on-staff assaults per 100 ADP. Patuxent Institution and Maryland Correctional Institution for Women did see increases in their assault rates, while the overall trend was one of decline for this division. In fiscal 2023, 2 homicides were reported, and that is the same number of homicides reported in fiscal 2022 and 2021. Moving forward to the budget section, I'd like to bring your attention to page 10 under fiscal 2024 to discuss proposed deficiency appropriations. Most of these I've discussed as well in the overview analysis, but to reiterate, there were several shortfalls identified in the previous budget after it was passed. There was some inflationary adjustments needed for electricity and food costs, food services. But there was also a $9.4 million payment to the U.S. Department of Labor for their investigation into improper timekeeping procedures within DPSCS. And to remind you all, the first payment for that investigation was made in fiscal 2021 with $468,000 for the first facility where they discovered the discrepancies. Then in fiscal 2023, a second payment was made as a settlement totaling $13 million for 3,874 employees. This investigation continued, and this $9.4 million represents the most recent payment required. And that is in order to make officers whole who were wrongly shorted for their time worked. The last 3 bullets are for medical costs. The first is $13 million that was needed to fund the waiver of past credits, as well as fiscal 2023 liquidated damages that were waived as part of an agreement with the contractor to approve their ability to meet the standards of the contract. Next, there was $19.8 million needed to fund the waiver of fiscal 2021 and 2022 liquidated damages as part of a formal contract dispute settlement agreement with the vendor. There were 17 claims in total in contention, and the Office of the Attorney General recommended that the state settle. And there was also a $20 million settlement amount on top of that $19.8 million dollars that were waived. This was all of that required as part of the settlement. One of the core issues at dispute in that settlement was a misaccounting of Medicaid credits, but there was also the need to concede to the vendor because of the economic state that they were in and their ability to meet statutory staffing levels. Finally, the medical contract expired in December, and that extension for 6 months was estimated to cost $17.4 million. DPSCS is working to replace that contract, and DLS recommended budget bill language in the overview and administration analyses that asked for a report on this replacement. Exhibit 7 on page 8 breaks down the overall $1 billion budget for the corrections function. Personnel costs for approximately 5,035 employees make up about 2/3 of the budget. The healthcare costs for the healthcare contracts for the incarcerated individuals is the other substantial item. And then there's also a substantial budget for supplies for the Maryland Correctional Enterprises for the goods that they produce, as well as equipment for the Maryland Department of Labor correctional education classes. Exhibit 8 on page 12 breaks down the proposed budget increase of $6 million by item. The dollar amount of $6 million hides some of the overall changes that are occurring. Starting with personnel, there's large changes related to improved turnover, regular earnings adjustments and salary increases, as well as overtime earnings. And those personnel increases total $50.4 million. However, there are also some large decreases in this unit, mostly from the deficiencies that I just mentioned. The retroactive payments to the U.S. Department of Labor, as well as the medical waivers, totaled a decrease of $33.7 million. And another decrease of $3.5 million was seen due to the one-time funding in fiscal 2024 for anti-contraband mailroom renovations. The personnel data section begins on page 13, and as I just mentioned, there were 5,035 allowed positions in fiscal 2025, which is a reduction of 22 positions from the working appropriation. This includes about a reduction of $1.8 million, and most of those positions are transferred to other units of DPSCS, other than 2 that are going to the newly independent Governor's Office of Children, and those are shown on Exhibit 9 on page 13. Vacancies have also improved in this unit by about 200 positions compared to this time last year, and Exhibit 10 shows the vacancies by classification. Most of the positions and vacancies are for correctional officers, but there's also high vacancy rates in most other classifications, particularly for mental health staff, Maryland Correctional Enterprise staff, and correctional support officers, such as dietary and recreation, laundry, as well. The office and administrative workers saw the biggest improvement in employment, as well as case managers. Moving on to the issue section on page 16, the first issue headline is that new hires decreased again in calendar 2023, and the calculated hiring gap grew again due to the continued separations. Exhibit 11 shows this trend, which began in calendar 2016. There were improvements until 2020, but there has been a 3-year trend of new hires decreasing since the height of the pandemic. Exhibit 12 on page 17 shows the cumulative hiring gap that grew since separations began outpacing hiring in calendar 2015. There's been an increase in that gap in the past 2 years, but it is lower than the peak seen in calendar 2019. There's still a lot of work to be done, though. The main reason why it's hard to keep individuals on board is the extreme short staffing and reliance on mandatory overtime that affects the lived experience of these officers. There's also a vicious cycle that has been going on for a few years because of this. According to the most recent hiring and attrition report, 310 entry-level COs separated from the department in calendar 2023, as they were unable to finish even 1 year of working under the heavy mandatory overtime and short staffing. A staffing study released last year suggested that approximately 2,500 more positions are needed to be funded in order to bring the department in line with staffing standards. But there still remain vacancies that the department needs to fill before they can feasibly propose to increase their position allotment. The department is making concerted efforts to fill those positions, and there have been dramatic improvements in January and February of this year, according to the most recent data available. The Human Resources Division within DPSES streamlined the hiring steps that were required in many of these positions, as well as fast-tracking the most qualified individuals so that they're not lost in the application process. The single-day hiring events that they have been putting on are a lot of work to put on, but they have brought in a lot of new people than the previous hiring process allowed. There is concern, however, that these pushes to fill positions require a lot of manpower and work in our temporary solutions that may rely a little bit too much on suspending the typical rules for hiring, which for the state of Maryland have generally emphasized structured qualification determination processes, as well as structured interviews. Exhibit 13 shows the current salary level for entry-level COs. It's currently at $51,563 per year, plus a $5,000 bonus for signing on and completing the entry-level academy. There's also a $2,500 bonus for Western Maryland or the Eastern Shore, which have been harder to keep fully staffed. However, those bonuses are only for the first year, and so the CO2 salary may not be as attractive, especially as the main way that you can increase your pay as a CO2 is by working more overtime. And that becomes an endurance game that's just not sustainable for long-term employment. There was an average increase of 1.4% from fiscal 2011 to 2017, and an average increase of 6.8% from fiscal 2017 to 2023 in this starting salary for COs. And most of the bumps in pay came in fiscal 2020, 2022, and 2023. A recent statewide salary analysis released by DBM recommended that the salary midpoint for DPSES COs be increased by 6% to closely align with peer jurisdictions, but the entry-level salary they did not recommend to increase. A retention initiative, such as that midpoint salary increase, would cost the state approximately $23 million and would affect the current salaries of nearly 6,000 employees, which include both bargaining and non-bargaining unit employees. Related to these hiring and attrition reports I've been mentioning, DLS recommends to release the $100,000 in general funds that was restricted pending the second report that we received this January. The second issue today that I'd like to talk about is the tablet computer program. In April 2022, the department began providing these tablets to incarcerated individuals through their existing telecommunications vendor, Global Tellink, or GTL, or Viapath. These technologies have been made they've been made available across the nation, and nearby corrections departments in Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, Delaware, North Carolina, and West Virginia have all developed similar programs. Local jails in Virginia have similar programs, but the Virginia Department of Corrections does not. The program in Maryland serves approximately 16,741 individuals with a surplus of 10% for fluctuations in population. All incarcerated individuals are allowed this opportunity, and they're allotted a maximum of 60 minutes a day to send text messages at no direct cost directly from their tablet. If they receive, inbound texts, photo messages, and videos can be transmitted for 20 cents per message, and phone calls for 3.2 cents per call. The average cost of telephone calls is about $18 in total per month per individual, and that is all from their own funding. The tablets that they are provided include free programs and resources that are listed on page 21 and 22. but the vendor makes most of their money by offering premium content packages, which reach a max at $22 per month for unlimited streaming of department-approved music, games, movies, and books. There's also some options for paying per minute or limited access that are listed on page 22. In general, DPSES has reported successful program implementation, including improved behavior, reduced idleness, and reduced agitation among the population. One issue that I'd like to bring up is related to the tablet computer program directive that the department issued. That directive requires incarcerated individuals to sign a tablet policy acknowledgement form, as well as tells the department certain things that they have to comply with to make those tablets available to the inmates. Part of that agreement is that if the individual destroys the tablet, it would be $250 to replace it at their own cost. And about 202 individuals so far have destroyed their tablet, or about 1%. There's additional concerns with cybersecurity, and with any technology in prisons, there's chances that vulnerabilities could be exploited to engage in unauthorized activities. For instance, in Idaho, a group of incarcerated individuals were charged with exploiting software vulnerabilities in tablets to add credits to their commissary accounts. Additionally, there have been cases in Maryland where individuals in custody had access to unauthorized cell phones, and there was one case where an individual attempted to falsify records in order to secure their release. For this tablet program, there should be continual and robust management of unauthorized use of tablets to prevent their cybersecurity risks and keep their program running smoothly, and that extends to keeping the hardware of the tablets intact. Another concern is that the department themselves may not always hold up their end of the agreement in the tablet program directive in terms of supplying all of the charging equipment needed, as well as the time and space needed to actually use the tablets that these individuals are paying for. Particular concerns have been raised from the public regarding incarcerated individuals being denied access to charging stations, preventing them from using those purchased services for portions of the day. And according to these concerns, assaults are lower where access is guaranteed, but assaults are higher where access is not guaranteed. At this point, there has been no study in between the connection of tablet use and assaults, or the adherence to that tablet directive and assaults. But anecdotally, MRDCC, one of the facilities in Baltimore City, had a tripling of assault rates in the past year, and they have reportedly had the most issues in ensuring that tablets are provided consistently. On this issue, DLS is asking DPSES to comment on challenges to guaranteeing that each housing unit has the proper technology needed to consistently deploy tablets as guided in their program directive, as well as commenting on any funding needs that they may need to make changes to housing units. The final issue today is the Reentry Passport Program. This rollout has been slower than expected. Those technology changes were first announced in March of 2022, and the pilot program began in fall of 2022. Last year, the budget committees asked for more information from the department, and that was submitted on September 1st. As of that point, the department still had not fully rolled out the program, but anticipated that it would be fully rolled out by fall of 2023. And at this point, we have not been notified that it has been rolled out at this point. The program is an extension of the current Maryland Think portal, which is hosted by DHS and provides convenient access to a variety of vital documents and social services applications. Returning citizens in general have historically had difficulties in securing and maintaining vital records through their incarceration. And while this process is facilitated by the DPS social workers and case managers, Exhibit 14 on page 26 shows the currently reported number of individuals receiving social security cards, birth certificates, and MVA ID cards. In fiscal 2023, which was the first year that they reported these measures, about 1,577 received a birth certificate, which is approximately 9% of the incarcerated population. We're asking DPSCS to comment on the best way to identify quantitative goals and projections related to their reentry objectives, including their identification cards, but also extending to the new objectives reported in the fiscal 2025 MFR. Before I conclude, I'd like to point out Appendix 1 on page 28 summarizes all 7 reports that were requested last year, as well as Appendix 2 on page 30, which summarizes the findings of the most recent regional operations audit for DPSCS. And in that audit, the auditors found some predictable issues related to overtime and timekeeping, as well as timely reconciliations of banking accounts that DPSCS maintains on behalf of incarcerated individuals. But that concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Jacob. Colleagues, any questions for Jacob? Seeing none, thank you so much. You're off the hook for now. We will call up Madam Secretary and her team to begin when you are ready, and thank you for your patience.
Good afternoon, Chair Lewis, Vice Chair Ivey, members of the subcommittee. For the record, my name is Carolyn J. Scruggs, and I'm the Secretary of the Maryland Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services. With me today are Joseph Sadal, Deputy Secretary of Administration, and Phil Morgan, Commissioner of the Division of Corrections. The department appreciates its ongoing collaboration with the Department of Legislative Services, as well as Mr. Cash. This was yet another thoughtful and very thorough analysis, so we thank you, Mr. Cash, for your hard work. I'd like to begin, as always, by recognizing the staff who work within the Division of Corrections. These are individuals who do an incredible job and work very hard every day. The analysis contains 3 issues for the department's response and 1 recommended action. DLS has requested the department comment on challenges to guaranteeing each housing unit has the proper technology needed to constantly deploy tablets as guided in the tablet computer program, directed, and funding needs for making any necessary changes to the housing units. The department is very proud of the tablet program. As with many of our older buildings, there can be technological challenges. These buildings are aging and weren't built to anticipate the vast array of technology needed to run a correctional facility. Securing the necessary bandwidth to allow for a seamless, robust talent program is a challenge within the facility walls. Despite these challenges, the department and the vendor work tirelessly to monitor the connectivity of all applications and ensure any downtimes is met at a minimum. The tablets offer a variety of resources at no cost to the incarcerated individual. These resources include educational and religious resources, entertainment options, facility updates, and even a Calm app. The tablet also provides an incarcerated individual an opportunity to increase contact with their loved ones by sending and receiving written messages to their loved ones, receiving approved photos, and making phone calls from their tablets in the privacy of their own housing unit. All content is downloadable through a secured Wi-Fi. This is an internal network operating only within the specific areas of the incarcerated individual's housing unit. It's a closed system, meaning that there is no access to the internet or internal department sites. The second request from DLS asks that the department provide the committee with the most recent implementation schedule of the Reentry Passport Program, including the number of formerly incarcerated individuals who are using the new portal. The department has long worked with federal and state partners to ensure that re-entered individuals have physical copies of critical documents. These documents tend to get lost as individuals incarcerated individuals transition back into our communities. The Reentry Passport portal will provide access to a secure online portal where these key documents are housed and can be accessed as needed. 2 pilot programs have already been completed at RCI and WCI. The department is currently working on a rollout plan to implement the Reentry Passport. And I'll also say that the passport actually started while I was Assistant Secretary, and there has been a delay in the rollout during the transition of someone into that new position there with me. But we do have a new Assistant Secretary for Reentry, and we are aggressively working to roll that out. The final issue that the department was asked by DLS to comment on is the best way to identify quantitative goals and projections related to reentry objectives, including identification cards, but also extending to other new objectives reported in the fiscal 2025 MFR. The department was proud to extend its reported data point on reentry and rehabilitative programming in FY 2023. A number of factors present challenges to quantitative goal setting for program evaluation and release documentation provision. One difficulty is setting proactive quantitative goals is the complexity of the total population for whom the services are delivered. There are a number of legal and operational factors outside the department's control that may impact engagement in a particular program or obtaining a particular document. Intermediate court releases that disrupt reentry preparations, reliance on policies within other state and federal agencies on document production, and varying eligibility of the incarcerated population are just some examples of the challenges we face in developing these goals. The department will explore benchmarks in its upcoming annual report and evaluate prior year performance to inform proposed changes to its MFR for FY 2025. The department believes that reentry starts at intake and is committed to building out programs as early within the incarceration term as possible. We also want to meet the needs of the underserved within our population. On a final note, the department would like to offer an update on the conclusion of the investigation with the United States Department of Labor. Through continued collaboration with ASME, we have identified all remaining workers who were impacted by the timekeeping practices prior to August of 2021. We expect to finalize payments in the coming months and fulfillment of this administration's values in supporting our state employees. We concur with the recommended actions, and we are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Colleagues, are there any questions? Secretary? Well, I have a couple. The first, actually, interestingly enough, I didn't know people could use tablets to hack their way out of prison. So that's just something that's going to be in the back of my mind for a while. I connect that to a conversation we had prior about drones. That's just separately from a question. Hopefully there isn't some connection there of people using tablets to bring drones and stuff in and out. That being said, do you guys, in the contract for the tablets, do you guys include, I believe it's called the QI standard for the type of devices that they utilize? This is what allows for wireless charging. So I remember when we talked about this prior, what I heard, the concern with the facilities was that you didn't want outlets in the rooms because people would, put things in there, hurt themselves, burn things, etc. But now a lot of devices now have the ability to wireless charge where you don't have to worry about it plugging in. I just wonder, has there been any conversation regarding that?
So I don't know of any conversation on the QI wireless, but to specifically respond to Mr. Cash's referral about MRDCC, first let me acknowledge that most of our facilities within the housing units have charging capability. There are sockets within the housing unit, especially if it's a dormitory environment. That's where their microwaves and hot pots and everything else are, so they have that ability. MRDCC was built as the DOC intake facility. That was its primary function. And when it was built as that function, those type of options were not built into that facility because of the transient population that was going to be there. So for us to have to go back and retrofit MRDCC is going to cost us quite a bit of money. So we're looking at how we can better serve that population because now it's being used as a facility to house more longer-term individuals.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that. I would definitely encourage us to look into that. And kind of as Jacob mentioned, if there is any ability to do some type of evaluation on, violence and access to these tablets, I think if clearly if the data is showing that more access or availability securely is helping to lower violent incidences, whether that's in the city or the other facilities, I think that helps your correctional officers feel safe in the environment. I think it just gives educational options, all that. That's something we'd be very supportive of. I did have another question, but I'll hold it because I see my vice chair has one, and I'll come back to mine.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Secretary, and to the entire team for the work that y'all have been doing. Was in a bill hearing yesterday, and MCE was brought up, and of course there was a larger discussion about it. The question that I had for you was if you could walk us through what programs are available to ensure that people who have been doing work within the walls under your jurisdiction, is there a pathway for them to get certified for the various skills that they've been developing while they've been housed?
Thank you for that question. All of our programs are nationally certified. So we work with Maryland Department of Labor, and whether it's a 6-month program or a year program or 2 program, depending on whether it is carpentry or barbering or whatever it is, they received a nationally certified certificate. Yeah. It doesn't say MRDCC or MCIJ or MCIW. It is nationally accredited, and they're able to go out in the community and work with that. We also have certification programs that are sponsored by our community colleges that also bring certificates along with them. And then what we do upon their transition, when they're about 120 days out from release, we know those individuals that are going home. We then connect them with the reentry navigator, who, if they're not already working because they are able to go out and work every day, starts to then look for opportunities based on the certifications that they have for placement into jobs. And if they are going to still be under our supervision, under parole and probation, that process is continued until they're gainfully employed.
I really appreciate it. Sometimes we don't hear all of the good things that have been taking place, and that specifically is good to know.
Thank you.
That people have been leaving with these certifications, so thank you.
Yeah.
On that note, actually, so one of the questions I wanted to ask about was Project Fresh. Can you explain to me what Project Fresh is,
Sure.
what it's supposed to do?
Sure. Actually, when we understood that there was a need for a brick and mortar for a woman's pre-release center that we did not have, and it was an unfunded mandate, and we didn't have the funds to actually start one. What we decided to do was to look at the women's population and who was eligible for pre-release or who was within a year to 15 months maybe towards release. We actually presented, I was actually part of that development. We presented our thoughts to the population there that were within that pool, and what would you need in order for us to help you with a smooth transition. So it is kind of our pre-release hub still behind the walls. I invite you to come out and see it at any time. It works remarkably. There is a social worker dedicated to that unit. What's different about it is that the women move just as if they were on the outside, so they're able to move through the campus. They know when to go pick up their medications on their own. They know how to move the child on their own. They're going to school every day or either working or doing both day and night. We also bring in the evening, we bring in speakers, maybe on domestic violence, maybe on substance use disorder. It is constantly something going on in that unit. Again, I can't speak enough about it. I invite you to come out and see it for yourself.
I think many of us would welcome the opportunity to see that, honestly. I wanted to know, obviously, we passed the Gender Responsive Pre-Release Act a couple of years ago that had some specific things on programming separate from the building, right? That, you know, I feel like we've talked about the pre-release building. We're going to continue to work on that. But right now I'm talking about the programming. And one of the things I think that was in there was, you know, requiring the department to assist female inmates in improving their education, upgrading vocational skills, and obtaining suitable employment through classes to earn industry certification or community college credits, workforce training, and job placement. So within Fresh, and this is my question, are there components within Fresh that are helping them work towards industry certification or things of that nature?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question also. Many of the women are already enrolled in the Goucher program that's there, that actually live on the Fresh Housing Unit. Some of them are enrolled in the hospitality program that is a hospitality certification that's offered by the community college there. Many of them work within MCE shops. Some of them work in the graphics design department, and they're getting certification that way. So absolutely, and I will share with you that on yesterday I signed an MOU with the University of Maryland system that is going to help us bring all 12 university institutions behind the walls, working with Chancellor Perlman on that. And so they will also be infused into Project Fresh as well.
I'm very, very happy to hear that. I think now that most of the universities have gone online essentially through the pandemic, I've always thought there's no excuse for us not to have the full weight of the state of Maryland's educational system behind you guys there. So that's really, really good to hear. The last question I had connected to that is on, is there options for work release tied to this too? And what type of jobs are they doing outside?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, if they are, depending on their classification, they could be work release eligible, pre-release eligible, or minimum. If they are work release eligible, then they are leaving the campus every day and going to work. Unfortunately, because of the stereotype that our community still has about the offender, they don't have the best jobs, but they have a lot of fast food jobs or industries that are very close to the Jessup area that are willing to accept them. So yes, we need to grow better in our opportunities for them with jobs, but that means that the public image of them is going to have to change a little as well for that acceptance. We welcome other individuals that are willing to come on as work release employers. We're always looking for new employers to vet them so that we can send not just our women but our men back into the community.
Thank you. And the last one is transportation for them. Do they have transportation? How do they, once they step outside,
it actually varies depending on, so it varies. Some of them actually do receive a stipend. They go and come as they need. Some employers actually come and pick them up, and we'll take them and bring them back. Example, not the women, but for example, on the Eastern Shore, Purdue comes to ECI, picks up about 15 guys every day, takes it to the plant, they bring them back. Many of the women are going back and forth on their own, and they know the time restrictions and when they're supposed to be back on the campus.
Got it. Thank you. Colleagues, any further questions? See none, we appreciate you guys.
Thank you.
All right, we do have a couple folks here to testify orally. I'm going to start with Tom Myers, Ibukun, hopefully I said that correctly. Tom Myers, Ibukun, Herbert, and Amina. If you all can approach the panel, you can begin when you are ready. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jegede Ibukun. I'm a member of ASME Locus 1678. I've worked for the Department of Corrections, Maryland Department of Corrections, for approximately 12 years. As the analysis mentioned, we are very short-staffed. We can tell you at this point, every post needs to be staffed or created. But too many are still unstaffed. For example, in my institution, in the yard, we're supposed to have approximately 9 officers when recreation is going on, but we barely have 2. washing over 200 incarcerated individuals. That's incredibly dangerous for everyone. Covering short staff is taking a big toll on families. We get drafted almost every day to stay behind and do overtime almost every day per week. For the past week, I've seen my kids for only once throughout the week, just because I'm been drafted. The Department of Budget and Management hired consultants to look at our uncompetitive salary scales. They found that our correctional salary scale is less 6% behind comparing to other jurisdictions around us. I have been participating with my local to help recruitment events. This should be done more frequently because it really helps. We need also to clean up and mobilize our hiring process. About a month ago, I invited my friends to my house just to help them apply for the job. But upon getting to the website, we found out that the website is no more working. So these are just few things we hope to be able to keep working with legislatures and administrations to fix the issue quickly. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Whoever wants to go next.
How you doing today? My name is Herbert DeBose. I'm the executive board member for ASME Local 3661, and I am a sergeant at home detention. I've been an officer for DPSCS for 16 years. Ladies and gentlemen, today I sit before you to talk about the unique Central Home Detention Unit. What makes Central Home Detention Unit unique is unlike the private home detention. We have case managers, police communication officers, and special police enforcement staff who respond to incarcerated individuals instantly when a violation happens. When an incarcerated individual leaves the house unauthorized, the police communication operator who monitors them for 24 hours a day dispatches enforcement staff, and the enforcement staff immediately responds to the call. That sounds amazing if the unit was properly staffed with the right equipment and the proper training. Home detention currently has 11 enforcement staff that responds to about 200 incarcerated individuals across the entire state of Maryland. If you do the numbers, that's not efficient at all. That small amount of staff does the job without the proper vehicles to transport, the proper restraints, and now less training than the previous officers that came before them. Our current budget has the unit reusing old broken equipment for the incarcerated individuals, vehicles without security partitions to detain violating incarcerated individuals, and a proper staff with sufficient training to respond to violations. Officers respond to violations across the entire state of Maryland, like domestic violence, mental health issues, drug overdose, and even incarcerated individuals with loaded firearms. These officers need proper equipment and training to make it home safe to their families. Furthermore, inadequate funding for home detention undermines the ability of officers to effectively monitor and respond to violations. Insufficient resources limit the deployment of monitoring technologies such as GPS anklet bracelets and impedes the hiring and training of personnel responsible for overseeing and enforcing compliance with the terms of home detention. The lack of oversight creates a dangerous gap in our justice system, allowing potential threats to go unchecked within our communities. To conclude, the ramification of unfunded home detention on public safety is undeniable. We cannot afford to ignore this issue any longer. It is incumbent upon us to get the attention of policymakers to allocate the necessary resources to bolster the vital program. Only then can we truly safeguard our communities and pave the way for more efficient and effective criminal justice system. Thank you.
Thank you, Herbert. Tom?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Myers. I'm a member of AFSCME 1772. I've worked as a correctional officer now for 23 years, and currently I'm assigned to Maryland Correctional Enterprises. I work in the metal shop out of Hagerstown. My job is to provide supervision and training for the individuals who choose to work at MCE. In the metal shop, folks, they learn basic job skills from reading a tape measure, assembly, fabrication, to advanced skills of painting, welding, shearing, bending the metal. And during their time working in the metal shop and other MCE shops, they do have the ability to earn certifications that are good on the street. As a matter of fact, the metal shop out of Hagerstown is about to start a certified welding program with Hagerstown Community College, which would provide pretty good jobs for the individuals as they get out. As a MCE officer, I do enjoy what I do. I enjoy the individuals that probably never had a job in their life. And every day they get to see the things that they do, the skills that they learn, and they get to take them home. I've been fortunate to write multiple letters for individuals that's gotten out, and they have gotten jobs due to the skills that they learn, metal shop, meat plant, whichever MC shop it is. If it's MCE or other activities or programs for the individuals, we need to have enough correctional staff to be able to continue to do this work. We ask that you keep investing in us and these important programs in our prisons. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all of you all for coming some pretty far. We appreciate your service to the state, and we hear you. We know there's a lot more work to do, from the monitoring to the amount of folks who's in oversight. I mean, that story you just shared of 2 folks having to oversee over 200 people sounds scary to me, right? And I tip my hat of you all being able to walk out there with confidence and maintain that environment, because we need you to. And also the work you're doing in the metal shops and MCE. Literally everything here is designed by MCE in some form or fashion. So we appreciate you all. Colleagues, any questions for them? Delegate McComas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the gentlemen that have to take people into custody because they violated the monitor, I think you indicated that there weren't any protections in the car. And I guess what I was kind of wondering is, I assume you don't have the ability to handcuff them. Do you have the ability to make sure they're not carrying any weapons or anything?
Well, some of our vehicles have partitions in them, but it's not all of them. So depending on the officer that is dispatched to that call, you do have I have a partition, but everyone doesn't. Now we handcuff them, but when you don't have a partition, the person has to ride in the front with you. So let's say hypothetically someone goes to Salisbury from Baltimore, and you have a lockup. I mean, you have to take them back. That person has to ride in the passenger seat for you to either take them to ECI or Jessup, because those are the hubs that we have to take them back to. That's increasingly dangerous. That's a lot of time to be sitting beside someone. So if we have to use 1 or 2 vehicles all the time when it goes to a lockup. So that's increasingly, and sometimes when that vehicle goes down, or those 2 vehicles goes down, you have to use that 1 vehicle. We do handcuff, but you have to handcuff someone from the back. Unlike when you go to like transportation, when they put a traditional 3-piece and the person is cuffed from the front. When you go on a lockup for us, we have to cuff them from the back, secure them in the vehicle, and then transport them to whatever hub. So it's increasingly dangerous.
Well, it's probably uncomfortable for the guy that's handcuffed too.
This as well. This is the reason why. So the partitions is vital, because what happens, it keeps the incarcerated individual safe, and it also keeps the sergeant safe for that transport. That makes sense.
A real quick follow-up. So,
Very
okay,
quickly.
when you're picking somebody up, do you get a background on him that it's not a DWI, but, he's assaulted people in the past? Or do you get any idea of if they're kind of, that there's more risk than if it's just that, somebody that shoplifting or something?
Well, to be non-biased, because we all are people. So if it's two calls that they generally, if they're a high-ranking gang member or they had a gun charge, we have specific codes for that. Anything outside of that, no, you go there, you are dispatched, they pretty much tell you what the violation is, kind of give you some upside on what you're going into. But as far as their charge, no, we don't get that.
So you could get somebody that is a really bad hombre and you don't really know about it.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, we're all supposed to have an impartial justice system. Thank you. Thank you for that. Any further questions? All right, seeing none, we appreciate you guys. We have a few more people here to testify.
Thank you.
Amina from the Women's Pre-Release Equity Coalition. Is she here? No. Is there anyone virtual? All right. Beth Tomasello and Alethea Murdaugh. All right. All right, those are favorable with amendments. So we have a couple here that are here under info. Heather Warnkin from University of Baltimore School of Law. Also, Jamie Grace Alexander, Trans Right Advocacy Coalition. Alice Wilkerson from Advanced Maryland. And I don't see her, but Monica Cooper. All right, you all can begin when you're ready.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Heather Warnkin. I serve as the Executive Director at the University of Baltimore School of Law Center for Criminal Justice Reform. Prior to my current role, I served at the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Justice Programs. Among many hats I wore, I served on DOJ's Prison Rape Elimination Act working group and also a member of a specialized team focused on assessing the needs of vulnerable incarcerated individuals experiencing sexual and other forms of victimization behind the walls of the nation's prisons and jails. To start, we want to thank you for the budget language included last year requiring DPSCS to submit a report addressing the treatment of trans incarcerated individuals. In partnership with the Trans Rights Advocacy Coalition, our center recently completed a detailed analysis of DPSCS's report, which we submitted as written testimony to inform this committee's oversight. Trans people are incredibly vulnerable everywhere, and this is especially pronounced in confinement settings. The DOJ's data find that trans people are nearly 10 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than the general prison population. Trans women housed in men's facilities are at especially high risk, nearly 13 times more likely to be sexually assaulted. Though a report of this subject would be an important place to acknowledge this heightened risk of violence and maltreatment, DPSCS's report acknowledges none of this context, nor the reasons the report was mandated in the first place. Instead, it describes the, quote, unfortunate reality of high rates of false reporting, end quote, and the use of, quote, the PREA complaint process to manipulate housing assignments. The report appears to be focused more on creating a stereotyped image of trans people without addressing the real harms and significant risks this population regularly undergoes while in the department's custody. So in my very brief time left, I will highlight just a few of the many troubling findings in our analysis, starting with the fact that even after numerous lawsuits against the department and harrowing public testimony last session on the Trans Respect Agency and Dignity Act, DPSCS readily admits that it violates PREA Standard 115.42 by housing incarcerated individuals strictly on the basis of genitalia. The PREA standard requires that housing assignments be made on a case-by-case basis, which gives serious consideration to a trans or intersex person's own views with respect to their safety. DPSCS's report also includes other harmful assertions, including an alarming volume of unfounded sexual abuse and harassment claims, which in correctional settings can indicate a dismissive or hostile environment to providing safe and adequate channels for addressing harm. DPSCS's report also lacks critical information, including on other relevant PREA standards, transfer requests, and the use of solitary confinement deemed by the United Nations as torture. So this information is omitted, notwithstanding the documented reality that trans people are frequently, disproportionately, and inappropriately placed in administrative segregation as a, quote, protective measure, effectively punishing them as a response to their high rate of victimization and/or as retaliation for attempting to report harassment or abuse, and despite the legal requirement to keep and disclose this data found in Maryland Code Section 9614. So in conclusion, I just want to emphasize that this report raises grave concerns about the ongoing risks and conditions of confinement for trans people, potential bias among staff, and lack of overall protections for this vulnerable population. The tone and contents of this report indicate that DPSCS did not seek the perspective of directly impacted people, nor has it undergone sufficient internal education and culture change. The problematic contents undermine the credibility of DPSCS to handle its responsibilities with respect to the treatment of trans and non-binary people in its custody, necessitating further oversight and collaboration with external experts and stakeholders as described in the recommendations section of our written testimony. It is astounding and tragic that 9 years after a landmark successful federal lawsuit against the department for these horrific conditions, that we are still here having this conversation today. This isn't just about protecting trans people. This is about public safety, systemic legitimacy, and the health and dignity of our institutions, including the correctional staff and volunteers who work in them every day. So I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to provide this testimony and for any meaningful support that this body can provide in improving these conditions. We can and we must do better. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie Grace Alexander with the Trans Rights Advocacy Coalition. I stand here in support of my transgender community who faces horrific treatment while incarcerated. Our work comes directly from the problems we've heard expressed in community on the inside, including overuse of solitary confinement, PREA violations and low to no sexual safety, unaddressed discrimination and hate speech, retaliation for use of grievance procedure, unaddressed medical needs. Yet the new report we received from DPSCS claims, quote, the only complaint expressed by the transgender population is with commissary items not being available. We know this to be false. We know from the testimony on the bill track put forward in previous years, the Transgender Respect and Agency and Dignity Act, that there are serious problems. Lots of testimony just from last session's hearing discusses these additional problems. Additionally, on top of this, there are ongoing court cases where the department is forced to pay out thousands of dollars to people that they have mistreated. We know these problems, but not the scale, and we're working on solutions. Using the budget language, we know that there were 78 transgender individuals detained in the state of Maryland last year, yet there were 83 instances of administrative segregation. Another direct quote from the report, all transgender individuals are housed according to their physical genitalia, which seems to be their only policy consistent throughout all of DPSCS's departments that governs their treatment of trans inmates. PREA clearly outlines our community as one of additional risks while incarcerated, and DPSCS's language falls well below that federal standard. We appreciated your help in getting this important report issued from last year's budget language, and we really hope that we can work with the committee to bring more transparency and information about what's happening behind the walls. We'd like to ask the committee to repeat the budget language of last year with the additional information about the department's use of solitary confinement, as well as placement length data, transfer requests, and access to medical care. We don't have any transparency or any other ways to know what is going on within the department, so we'd like to request the same kind of reporting. Thank you.
Thank you. Alice?
Good afternoon. I'm Alice Wilkerson, Executive Director of Advance Maryland. Thank you very much for taking the time today to listen to the concerns of the trans community. Most of my testimony has already been said, so I will be very short. But I did want to reiterate that these issues are not unknown to the department. In addition to having legislation introduced in 2022 and 2023, and all of the lengthy, horrific testimony that went along with those hearings, and the multiple lawsuits against the agency, the Trans Rights Advocacy Coalition, myself, reached out to the department over the summer to ask for meetings with the agency. At first, this was met warmly and with great intention to meet with us. And then all communications ceased. Several of us began, but got no response of any kind. So we really have been left with no recourse, no ability to even have a conversation about what's going on with the agency. These are very serious concerns. That is why this committee passed the budget language last year. And so really to see the department in their report say that they haven't heard of any other concerns except for commissary items really just like ignores the entire fact of why they're being required to issue that report in the first place. And it's insulting. So we would really like to see additional oversight and some action soon by the agency. It does not require legislation to change the housing policy. This is something that is within the purview of the department that can be changed at any time. So we really appreciate being able to work with the committee and hope that we can continue this session.
Thank you, guys. First, thank you for your patience. Obviously, we've been here for a little bit, but I think we needed to hear the testimony that you guys shared. As there's been changes on the subcommittee, not everyone was here to listen to that last year, so it was really good for all of us. Colleagues, are there any questions? Delegate McComas.
If there was an unlimited budget, okay, and we don't have an unlimited, but what would you? My thought is I don't know. Would it be better that the trans community is segregated from the general population to kind of so that they're not victimized? I mean, what kind of solutions do you think that the agency should look at? And then the other question is, you don't have a lot of data on, how many people, how long they were in isolation, and then what the assaults were. I mean, it would be really good to get down to the granular if you can. I mean, you may not, because corrections is not the most open, transparent, group. But I just think that would be really helpful to state your cause. If you could get down to more of the granular and has somebody had to go to the hospital or, and if there was sexual assaults, have somebody, filed a claim against whoever did it, because that's a crime. So anyway, I just kind of wondered if you guys have gotten to the granular level of all the problems.
Well, that was like a five-part question, by the way.
What?
That was like a five-part question. Do your best.
There's a really simple answer to that, which is we're not the ones that are responsible for providing that data, and there's no way that we would be able to get access to that data. However, the budget language last year did request a lot of that data, for which the department did not provide. Yes.
In terms of solutions, I feel like the reason that we're here in front of you today is because we wanted to...
Sorry for a second. Can we fix her mic?
Sure.
The mic closest to her wasn't... Okay.
Thank you.
There we go. No worries.
In terms of solutions, that's kind of the reason that we're here in front of you today, is that we felt like the solutions that we were proposing were not adequately aware of the scope of the issue. So we wanted to take it back to get as much data from inside as we possibly could. And right now, that looks like working with the department, but also building our own individual relationships between our coalition and people who are on the inside through surveys and letter writing and interviews with people who were formerly incarcerated.
And I'd love to jump in on solutions as well. I noted in my initial testimony, but our written submission has a dedicated recommendation section that includes 4 items. Continuing this requirement in the budget language and expanding it. So one of the things that we really try to bring to light with all of this detailed analysis is that the department's first such report makes clear that the legislature cannot reasonably rely on DPSCS to accurately self-report. So we make some recommendations around information that should be in there, that should be disclosed, that's missing, but also a more collaborative, transparent approach to working with directly impacted people, PREA experts, and others to make sure that they do it right. Again, highlighting working with formerly incarcerated individuals, trans rights advocates, and PREA subject matter experts. and in particular to review and update the department's policies and practice to ensure full compliance with PREA Standard 11542. The U.S. Department of Justice made crystal clear in 2016 that what the department is doing and owned right in the pages of their report is a violation of the Prison Rape Elimination Act. And this is such an important standard because that housing decision and the case-by-case process and safety considerations that are supposed to go into that are such a threshold decision for whether or not that person is going to be safe or face problems after that. So also when you asked about solutions, we already have a lot of them, including that are built into federal law under PREA. We're just not doing it currently. So we talk about the training and technical assistance that they could benefit from. And lastly, we recommend that DPSCS would greatly benefit from collaboration that allows an external advocate or provider to be a part of that case-by-case housing determinations that are such a fundamental part of keeping a trans or non-binary person safe.
Thank you. There's a lot here, but I would encourage the representatives from the department that are still here to engage with the advocates before you guys leave to continue this conversation. All the points you guys brought up are duly noted, and we're definitely going to review it all, and I appreciate your well-cited document there as well. But I really do encourage the representatives from the department here to engage them as we continue to engage the conversation. Colleagues, any further questions? Delegate McComas.
I guess how much the state had to, because of not complying and their lawsuits and everything. You might not know, but I'm just kind of curious. You know, it's all about the money ultimately, right?
I know that there already have been settlements, and there are open lawsuits right now that are undetermined, including a very new one that the Baltimore Sun and other outlets have covered recently, filed by, I believe, Brown, Goldstein, and Levy on behalf of 3 trans incarcerated individuals that's playing out in real time. There's also a new, really important decision out of the Fourth Circuit that held that this type of treatment, as well as we have documented, is not just a violation of PREA and other laws and standards, but a violation of the ADA. So I think there could potentially be an avalanche of other claims that could follow.
Thank you guys so much for your testimony. Like I said, Department of Corrections, I know you guys will engage. And with that, I think that was the last group we had to testify today. Yep, I don't see Monica Cooper here. So thank you all for coming out. Public Safety and Admin, we are adjourned.